We are grateful as we go live on Facebook. Woo! So the best story yet on Facebook, I get lots of notes from people I know and lots of notes from people I don't know as well. And so I'm going to tattletale on my family. I got a call this week from my oldest firstborn niece, Jessica, and we got to, as a cousin, well, let's see, she was my niece, so my oldest brother's firstborn. Didn't get to meet her until she was about 18 because they lived in California. And she walked off the plane when we went to meet her at Midway Airport, and it was me in a younger version. And so she called, and she calls me Auntie T, and she said, Auntie T, I went on your Facebook page, and I watched you, and you have given me the permission to be who I've come here to be. And so we don't know. Now, of course, she loves me, obviously. I really have only seen her 3 or 4 times in my life based on demographics. That happens sometimes, doesn't it? But we never know how we're going to touch somebody when we're authentic and we're real and all of those other things. And so we talked this week and we made a commitment that we would text and do, those other things that we do. I get so busy doing what I'm doing here at church that I forget sometimes that I have a life outside of church. So I may not answer your call for a day now because I've had some new priorities for my life. And so she's encouraging me with that as well. And how perfect, isn't it, to start a month off of love with a loving call from someone that I love. And we know that, and we both said this, it was perfect timing because it's God's timing. And so how do we do this? How do we let our love shine forth? And so I hope this month, as we focus on that and we keep changing up the music for you all, that you remember that my job as a minister is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Right? Okay, good. Just remember that. And should that bother you a little bit more than normal, go ahead and call me about it or text me or email me, because then we can talk about that. And so we let our love really shine once we realize that we are the love. When we realize we have a dimmer switch. And so my growing edge every day is to temper my zeal with wisdom. That's one. And number 2, to be more like stage lighting versus the flashlight. Yes? Does that make sense to you all? If I'm always so intense, it's not always comfortable for everybody, right? And then uses up all my energy. So a stage person once said to me, why don't you try to be like stage light? I said, oh, I never thought of that. Thank you so much. Because I learned as a kid, be like a flashlight and know that God's leading you down a path, which served me as a child. But when you get older, we get to always assess, is it working? And so modifying is always a great thing. We get to experience love when we take time with ourselves. When we make an appointment on Sunday morning that we keep here, or we go to a class, or you go to the beach by yourself, or whatever it is that you do, sit in your house alone, whatever it is, but take time to be with you and to know the God of your understanding through you. So I'd like for us to look at 3 ways that we can do this, in addition to however else you're already doing it. And then I'm going to give a little story of what that looks like. Charles Fillmore in Talks on Truth, which comes in many versions of this, but the title always is the same. He says on page 64, love in the world in a diluted form as affection between husband and wife, partner and partner, parents and children, friend and friend, colleagues, is what it might look like to some of us. But it can be made manifest in its original strength and purity by each of us, opening the fountainhead and letting its mighty currents stream forth. Charles Fillmore is not somebody you're going to read on a Saturday night if you're looking for entertainment. However, he gets right to the point. The fountainhead is who we are. It's the source from which love emanates. That's in this physical body. God in us and as us also is a fountainhead. And I remember in ministerial school when we had to somehow get a creative idea on what a fountainhead looked like. And so I don't know why I still remember this, but I do. And I chose a beautiful garden that had lots of trellises, but in the middle was the fountain. And the trellises had different kind of flowers all the way around them. And I still can picture that. I was so proud of it. I don't remember what the grade was I got on it. But I remember thinking, oh, this helps me understand there's a source of water that feeds all of these plants in this garden. So we have the source within us, that is God, that is bigger than us. And then we also get to be that fountainhead for others as we're in relationship with them. He says, love can be made manifest in this world in its original strength and purity when we open up our fountainhead and let the mighty currents go forth. So that's what we get to do. How are we doing it? How do we not do it? Those are questions you get to answer for yourselves. All we're going to do here is kind of hopefully give you some ideas on what that might look like. Now, we know everybody has different perceptions, yes, about everything, and ask as many people are in here what that would look like. We're going to get those different ideas. But what I know is that we get to practice it every day, every time we choose to move from our head to our heart. Some people think you can only really have a mystical experience if you're doing Om and sitting in the lotus position. However, what I know is we can all get to where we need to be each time we decide to change our mind. Now, the mind, we know, has its residence in the whole body. Yes, sometimes your legs do things that you don't want them to do and things like that, especially as we're getting ready for bed, restless leg syndrome and things like that. But keep bringing it back to center. Can we know that what we're supposed to do right here, right now, is all right? And no one gets to judge it. Everybody breathe. I have 3 tangible ways I believe will help you. I did not write them. A guy named Dennis Merritt Jones, who's been around for quite a while, wrote this article that was printed back in, I think, in maybe 2014. And I have it in my file because it just makes sense to me. And he says, mending the heart of humanity, or for our context, opening the fountainhead, sounds like a daunting task. But if we are willing to be proactive and act mindfully, which means we think first, breathe first, rather than react, which means we're just not doing anything but reacting to whatever's outside of us, everything can be revived. He says we must become experts at administering spiritual CPR to every person, starting with ourselves and all else we meet on our path. You know I love words and things like that. So CPR, really, what does that mean? How about compassion, patience, and reverence? We have to start with ourselves first, and then we're able to do that with others. So face-to-face encounters, the people in the line at Walmart, the people in front of you and behind you on 278 that are probably not knowing where they're going, especially as we get busier down here, right? Can we do this? Online, if you're on Facebook or Twitter or any of those other, whatever all those other things are that I don't know. Can we breathe first before we react to those? And as I explained with my niece, it's not about distance. She lives in San Diego, I live here, and we're gonna have a heart connection every single day as we pray together. So how about CPR, compassion? What does that look like? One definition could be the capacity to imagine what it must feel like to live in another's skin, to be in that situation, and take appropriate action to help alleviate any discomfort or suffering when possible. That sounds like a doable definition, I think. Fillmore says, compassion and caring are the ties that bind us together in mutual understanding and in the unified attempt to uncover the divinity in each other. Now, I don't always remember to do that. And I don't always look at everybody and think, oh, that one's divine. I might add a little bit of something before that. If you remember, Reverend Mindy said that I would add holy to all of my things before I spoke them. And so what happens when I'm not seeing the divinity in you and you and you and you and you is I've let my humanity come in. So I have to take a step back, I have to breathe, and then, oh, wait a minute, I'm having a holy encounter. Every situation is a holy encounter. So there's a story about a guy who, he was a kid and he was selling, one of those, either a paper route or a magazine or something, kids go door to door. And he was at the end of the day, he hadn't made a lot of sales, and he was hungry. And he thought, okay, maybe this next house, they might invite me in. Didn't know. So he goes to the house and got a little bit of flustered because a cute young lady answered the door and invited him in so he could give the spiel and all of that, and then said, would you like a glass of water? And he said yes. And as the story goes, she's thinking, well, he looks a little hungry. I think I'm going to give him a really big glass of milk. So she watches him drink this milk, and he's savoring it and all of that. He makes the sale and he goes on his way. And as many of these stories that we hear, we know they're somewhat true. We're not sure just exactly how true they are. But we fast forward, and this little kid, whose name was Kelly, becomes a doctor. And now he's serving in some big metropolitan area. And he gets a call that there's some lady from this little bodunk town that he was from. And he's thinking, oh, I know that town. That name sounds familiar. Goes into the room. The woman has no insurance. And he gives her all that there is to receive, and he tells her, you're going to be fine. We're going to get this taken care of. And she says, I have no insurance. So as the story goes, is he gets the bill, he writes off, and he says, paid in full with a glass of milk. So she opens it, and she's in tears, of course. And she said, are you sure? He said, of course. We never have to pay for kindness. And so how do we do that? Through compassion, yes? And being present to people when we're in their lives. The second letter of CPR is patience. Henry Drummond, in The Greatest Thing in the World, a book that's been around forever, says he believes that 1 Corinthians is the best scripture in the whole Bible. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious. Let me start all over. We all goof, yes? Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And now faith, hope, and love abide. And of these three, the greatest is love. He says love is patience. This is the normal attitude of love. Love is a passive loving with no expectation. The waiting to begin. Not in a hurry, calm, ready to do its work. So what I know as I was reading this week and sitting with it, that's not how I learned what love was as a kid. And so I've had to unlearn and relearn, and I continue to do that at 60, to be able to read this and say, oh, love is patient and kind. Therese, be patient and kind. And so the self-talk goes on, and not in a negative way, but to say, oh, wait a minute, this is a mirror for me. When am I showing up less than patient? When am I showing up less than loving? And so I hope this month we don't beat up on ourselves. We say, how am I being a better person? Opening the fountainhead occurs when we call on love to come forth from within us. So I learned impatience as a child, and I get impatient most often with anything that's technical at all. And it's interesting to watch myself because I see it in my 2-year-old grandson. Oh, look, that's what I'm feeling like. He's acting like Nana. And so how do we get to understand it? It's because I want to know how everything works. This mind of mine wants to know everything. And guess what, Therese? You're not going to know everything, right? So can we breathe and be with what is, to borrow from Byron Katie? Just be with what is, in the moment, the here and the now. And as we practice patience with ourselves, Therese, then we're patient with others. So I told you this, every Sunday talk is always about the minister and what we got to do to be better people on earth. And I think those of you who have other ministers, I'm thinking, where are our friends from Ohio? Dana would say the same thing. Yeah, always trying to figure out how to be a better person and show up. Reverence, CPR, compassion, patience, and reverence. To practice knowing that everything is holy. The sacred presence of God is in every single face that we see. It's not always easy for me, especially when I'm in the 10 checkout line and there's somebody ahead of me, right? And then there comes the grace. Like, oh, wait a minute. I know nothing about their situation. And so let me be the presence I expect of myself. Fillmore says, God in me is unified with God in all. I am one with all people, with all things, and with all life. I am one with the one. I am. So we get to open the fountainhead, not by forcing, not by shoving, but by breathing into it and knowing that as we treat every moment as holy and sacred, every person as a divine encounter, then it shows the truth of who we are. Awe happens, yes. As we keep hearing about, did you hear about the lady this week who bought, 70 hotel rooms for the people in Chicago? I was expecting some owner of some big, huge company who just thought that would be good. She was an everyday person like you and me, who said, you know what? I'm not going to let those people sleep on the street. So we collected food today, and I hope you'll keep bringing food until we hear that that the pantries are full and everybody's back to work. And we know also that some of you may need some food, and if you do, please let me know, and we will make sure that you have it as well, because we take care of ourselves first. Yes? So Dennis Jones says, contained within the wisdom of the awareness that lies within each of us to be sacred love, to have every moment be a holy encounter, lies the healing of the heart of humanity. He says, how could we possibly conspire to do harm to another when we see ourselves and the living presence of the divine in each and every person? Imagine if we just did that to one other person today, the shift in Beaufort County would be huge. Yes? So we get to combine compassion with patience and with reverence to let our light shine, to live as love expressing. And how do you like what's up on the screen? And for those of you at home, it says, aren't you looking for love? And the person responds, no, I'm prepared to love. Another thing that I heard early on when I first met my beloved was, how about instead of falling in love, we rise in love? And I remember sharing that with Bev and Al. Let's rise in love. It sounds so much better, doesn't it? Fall, imagine, the pictures we can conjure up about falling, yes? So we're going to rise, stand a little bit taller, maybe send out Valentines to people you don't know this year. I'm not sure. You'll decide. So there's a story about an inmate who says, I'm going to use these principles that Dennis Jones suggests that we use. His name is Leo Wright. He says, I'm going to tell you something that I want you to remember always. Somehow, I, Leo Wright, am going to reach the hearts of every inmate in this prison. So he's in prison, and you hear about stories that people write and letters and all of that, but this one caught someone's eye. At least I'm going to die trying, he says. And what I always encourage people to say, since death is such a big part of my life, let's live trying, yes? So like Martin Luther King, he says, That is my dream. Though Dr. King phrased it in his famous speech as a dream, he was really promoting leaving a better world in which everyone is equal and free. Well, how was King able to do this? Leo says, simply put, he saw, he felt, he heard, he smelled, he lived, and he breathed a different reality in his own mind than most people at that time. I think we'd all agree, yes? The power of King's vision convinced millions of the justness of his cause. So on that same note, Leo says, I'm going to see and feel and hear and smell and live and breathe a different reality in my mind for the people in this prison that society has regarded as unchangeable. Now, please don't get me wrong, he says, I do understand that society is not to blame for us being in here, because most of us have made the choice not to choose love, but to choose fear. Like I said before, Leo says, I would like to apply for the job of showing all of these guys that love is the way to freedom. So what Leo has done has applied to a New Thought seminary and will be an ordained minister by the time he gets out in 2 years. So we can make a difference, right? We just get to choose and see how that is. So C for compassion, P for patience, R for reverence. And what Dennis Jones says, in this way we open up our fountainhead and let love's mighty current stream forth from around us, in us, through us, and as us. And I'm going to ask Penny to join us back at the piano as I invite you to close your outer eyes, and I want to read a poem from Ken Wilber. He's one of my mentors. He talks about the 4 quadrants, and he talks about coming forth. His model is usually that of spiral dynamics and the human development system. And this is what he says. Let the world be quiet. Let the heavens and the earth and the seas be still. Let the world be waiting. Let the self-contradiction relax into the empty ground of its own awareness. And let it lie there quietly until it dies. And let us see how Spirit pours through each and every opening in the turmoil and bestows upon each situation the splendor like the setting sun as it graces the earth and all of its radiant inhabitants each night. See the cosmos dance in emptiness. See the play of light in all creatures, great and small. See finite words sing and rejoice in the play of the very divine, floating on glory that renders each transparent, flooded with joy that refuses time or terror, and that undoes the madness within each and every one of us of the loveless self and allows us to rejoice in our splendor. Indeed, indeed, let the self-contradiction relax into the empty ground of its own awareness and let it lie there quietly until it's gone. See the cosmos arise in its place, dancing madly and divine, self-luminous and self-liberating, intoxicated by a light that never dawns nor ceases, the light that is in you and in me. Let the ecstasy overflow and outshine the loveless self, and sing triumphantly with St. Catherine when she says, my being is God, not simple participation, but by a true transformation of me. My me is God expressing in this world. And as this earth becomes a blessed being and every eye becomes a God, and every we becomes God's sincerest form of worship, and every it becomes God's most gracious temple. And I arise to taste the dawn and find that love alone will shine today, in and through and as me. And the shining says to love it all and love it madly and always endlessly and ever fiercely, to love without choice and thus enter the all, to love it mindlessly and thus be the all, embracing the only and radiant divine, now as emptiness, now as form, together and forever. And love alone will shine today. And so we breathe into this moment. And we allow the CPR that we draw forth within each of us, the compassion, the patience, and the reverence, to have its way in, through, and as us, starting this month of love off with a mindset of knowing that as we become the change we want to see, the world becomes peaceful. And so we're grateful for this time together. And so we let it be. And while I ask Marcia to turn off the phone, please, same button, we move into our time staying contemplative